The receipt struck Emily Carter in the chest before falling onto the white tablecloth, right beside a glass of champagne that Chloe Bennett held with a barely contained smile. For a few seconds, no one in the private room of the Crown Madrid dared to breathe normally. A waiter froze beside the door. A pair of businessmen turned their heads from the neighboring table, and even the pianist in the main dining room seemed to miss a note. Ethan Whitmore remained seated with one hand resting on the back of Chloe's chair and the other pointing at the bill as if he were giving an order to an employee. Emily did not answer. She looked first at the paper, then at her husband, and finally at the satisfied face of his mistress. Her silence was not weakness, but the silence of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion far more serious than infidelity. If this story has you hooked from the beginning, stay with us until the end, because that night, no one left that restaurant as the same person. Chloe tilted her head with a feigned expression of compassion and caressed Ethan's arm, making sure Emily saw the diamond ring he had given her. It was exactly the model Emily had seen 2 weeks earlier on the statement of a card linked to the marital account. Chloe wore a red designer suit, her hair pulled into an immaculate bun, and spoke with the confidence of someone who believed she had won a war. Across from her, Emily looked too simple for such a place. In a dark blue dress with no visible logos, moderately high heels, and a leather handbag that Chloe had called old-fashioned as soon as she arrived. Yet something in her posture did not fit the image of a humiliated wife. She was not trembling, she was not crying, and she was not asking for explanations. Ethan mistook that calm for resignation. He never imagined that Emily had spent months gathering evidence, monitoring transfers, and waiting for the exact moment when he would show how far he was willing to go. "Don't make that face," Ethan added, raising his voice so the employees could hear him too. "You knew this was going to end. Chloe and I have projects, contacts, and a vision for the future. All you've ever known how to do is stay home pretending to support my ambitions while enjoying everything I paid for." Emily continued, looking at him without interrupting. This was the same man who years earlier had confessed that he could not sleep for fear of losing everything. The same man who had sworn he would never forget who stayed by his side when no one believed in him. Now he spoke as though she had been a burden. Chloe gave a soft laugh and raised her glass toward Emily. "You shouldn't take it as a personal defeat. Some women are useful for accompanying a man when he is just starting out, and others of us arrive when that man is finally ready to be with someone on his level." The waiter looked away uncomfortably, but Ethan smiled as if that cruelty were a sign of elegance. Emily held the bill between 2 fingers. The amount exceeded 4,000 euros. Ethan had ordered a bottle of collectible French wine, Iranian caviar, seafood brought in that very morning, and a special dessert that did not appear on the menu. He had also included use of the private room, a bouquet of roses, and a piece of jewelry ordered through the restaurant's concierge service. It was not merely a romantic dinner, but a coronation ceremony for Chloe, paid for with money Ethan believed he could take from his wife. "Did you make me come here just to pay for this?" Emily finally asked. Her voice sounded so calm that Chloe stopped smiling for an instant. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I made you come because we need to end our marriage like adults. You pay for dinner, sign the documents, and tomorrow you collect your things. My lawyer has already prepared a fairly generous proposal, considering you never contributed anything." Then he took out a black folder and placed it on the table beside the bill. Inside the folder were a divorce agreement, a waiver of any claim to investments made during the marriage, and a clause transferring responsibility for several personal debts to Emily. Ethan believed she would not understand the legal terms. For years, he had mistaken her discretion for ignorance. Emily turned the pages slowly and immediately recognized account numbers, company names, and digital signatures she had never authorized. There was the confirmation Thomas Reed, her lawyer, had spent weeks trying to obtain. Ethan did not merely want to leave her. He intended to make her responsible for a real estate project close to bankruptcy. "Sign here," he ordered, offering her a pen. "Don't turn this into a spectacle." Chloe leaned a little closer, watching the documents with an anxiety that betrayed her apparent indifference. Emily noticed the gesture and understood that the mistress was not merely a companion. She knew what the agreement contained. Perhaps she had even helped prepare it. That transformed an emotional betrayal into a calculated plan. "And what if I don't sign?" Emily asked. Ethan burst out laughing and looked at Chloe as if they shared a private joke. "Then you'll be left with nothing. The house is under my control. My contacts are on my side, and I can prove that you've lived off me for years. No one will believe that a woman who barely appears at social events has any real power." Margaret, Ethan's mother, had repeated that same idea so many times that he eventually came to believe it as an absolute truth. To the Whitmore family, Emily was a woman without an important surname, without visible wealth, and without ambition. They never wondered why certain businessmen greeted her with respect, why famous chefs sent her gifts at Christmas, or why she received calls she preferred to take away from everyone else. Ethan had only seen what he wanted to see, a useful wife while he was rising, and a disposable one once he found a more glamorous woman. Emily closed the folder and left it on the table unsigned. "First, I want to know something. Since when have you been using my name to borrow money?" The question erased Ethan's smile for a second. Chloe gripped her glass too tightly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, but his voice lost its firmness. Emily mentioned a company called New Horizon, 3 transfers made from the joint account, and a loan backed by an electronic signature supposedly belonging to her. Ethan sprang to his feet, making the tableware vibrate. "You're trying to divert attention because you're ashamed to admit that I left you. You always do the same thing. You hide behind questions, silences, and that attitude of superiority you don't deserve." Chloe took the opportunity to intervene. "Ethan hasn't stolen anything from you. He invested in our future, something you were never capable of building." Emily looked directly at her for the first time. Chloe held her gaze for only a few seconds before looking away. That reaction confirmed another suspicion. She knew about the transfers. Perhaps she expected the divorce to be signed that very night, so Emily could not make any later claim. In the outer dining room, several people had begun to pay attention. The door to the private room remained partly open, and Ethan's voice could be heard clearly. He did not care. On the contrary, he seemed to enjoy the public humiliation. He wanted Emily to leave defeated, turned into an example of what happened when a worthless wife clung too long to a successful man. "Don't leave without paying," he said, shoving the bill toward her again. "Dinner was your idea, Chloe, but my still wife can take care of the little detail." Chloe placed a hand on her chest and pretended to be surprised. "Ethan, maybe it's too much for her. We don't know how much money she has available." They both laughed. The waiter stepped forward and cautiously asked whether they needed a few minutes. But Ethan ordered him to bring the payment terminal. "I want to finish this now. Afterward, have someone escort my wife out. I don't want her continuing to bother important clients." The waiter obeyed, though his face showed growing discomfort. When he returned with the terminal, Emily opened her handbag. Ethan looked inside, expecting to see a cheap wallet or an ordinary bank card. Chloe leaned forward, ready to enjoy the moment when the transaction was declined. Emily, however, did not take out a conventional card. It was a matte black piece, with no visible numbers and no bank name. In the center gleamed a small golden crown, surrounded by 5 stars. The waiter immediately went pale. His fingers stopped moving, and the terminal nearly slipped from his hands. That symbol appeared on no commercial card. It was an internal credential, known only to the highest-ranking executives of Golden Crown Group. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked irritably. "Charge her and finish it." The employee did not answer. He looked at Emily, then at the card, and finally at the door, as if he needed to make sure he was not making a mistake that could cost him his job. "Ma'am," the waiter murmured, but Emily slightly raised her hand to stop him. She did not want him to reveal anything yet. Ethan interpreted the gesture as an attempt to hide the fact that the card was fake. "I knew it," he said, striking the table with his palm. "I bet it doesn't even work. Did you steal it? Or is it one of those knockoffs you buy online to pretend you have money?" Chloe recovered her smile and took out her phone, perhaps intending to record the moment. "This could be fun," she whispered, the abandoned wife trying to pass herself off as a millionaire. Emily placed the card on top of the bill, perfectly aligned with the edge of the paper. The waiter stepped back 2 paces and discreetly activated a button beneath a side console. It was an internal signal reserved for exceptional situations, presence of the chairwoman, reputational risk, or a security emergency. In less than a minute, Jason Roberts, general manager of the Crown Madrid, received the alert in his office. While they waited, Ethan kept talking. He explained to Chloe that Emily had always had a strange obsession with appearing dignified, even when she had nothing. He recalled a charity gala where she refused to wear a dress chosen by Margaret, and another dinner in Marbella where she preferred talking with kitchen workers instead of mingling with investors. To him, those decisions proved a lack of class. He did not understand that Emily had known several of those workers since before he obtained his first important position, nor did he know that some had started their careers in a small restaurant founded by her and her father. "This is your last chance," Ethan warned. "Sign, pay, and leave with some dignity." Emily rested her hands on the table. "You don't give me my dignity, Ethan. You can't take it away either." Chloe gave a forced laugh, but the waiter was no longer looking at her. His eyes remained fixed on the hallway, waiting for his superior to arrive. Jason appeared, accompanied by the dining room manager and 2 security supervisors. He walked quickly, his face tense. Ethan smiled when he saw him, convinced they were finally going to throw Emily out. He had dealt with Jason on 2 occasions and considered himself a distinguished client because he had reserved several business lunches. "Director, what luck that you came," he said. "My wife is causing a scene and is trying to pay with a fake card. I'd appreciate it if you handled the problem discreetly." Jason did not answer. His eyes stopped first on Emily and then on the black card lying on the table. The color drained from his face. He adjusted his jacket, stepped forward until he stood in front of her, and bowed deeply, far more respectfully than a professional greeting. "Madam Chairwoman," he said clearly, "we didn't know you would be visiting the establishment tonight. Please accept my apologies for not receiving you personally." The silence that followed was so intense that the sound of a glass breaking at another table could be heard. Chloe slowly lowered her phone. Ethan looked at Jason, then at Emily, and finally at the waiter, waiting for one of them to explain the supposed joke. "Chairwoman of what?" he asked with a rigid smile. "You must be confusing her with someone else." Jason remained upright, but his tone turned cold. "There is no confusion. Mrs. Emily Carter is the founder, majority shareholder, and executive chairwoman of Golden Crown Group, the company that owns the Crown Madrid and 27 other establishments in Spain." Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ethan shook his head several times. "That's impossible. My wife doesn't work." Jason looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and restrained contempt. "Your wife created this company 11 years ago. Thousands of people work because of her. The fact that you know nothing about her career does not make that career non-existent." Emily remained seated without any triumphant expression. She had not brought the card to show off. She had shown it because she needed to activate internal protocols and protect the records from that night. Ethan turned toward her, his face flushed. "All of this is yours?" he asked, pointing at the dining room, the crystal lamps, and the views of Madrid. "And you never told me," Emily breathed slowly. "I told you I had a business. You said you weren't interested in my affairs because you wanted to build your own name without depending on me. After that, you stopped asking." Ethan vaguely remembered those conversations, but he had reduced them in his mind to the idea of a small family restaurant. He had never cared enough to learn more. "You deceived me," he accused. "You made me believe you were an ordinary woman." Emily looked at him with a sadness more humiliating than any shout. "Being an ordinary woman would never have justified what you just did. If I did not own this place, I would still be your wife, and I would still deserve respect. A person's value does not change when a black card appears. The only thing that changes is how other people reveal who they really are." Chloe reacted before Ethan. She stood and began gathering her handbag. "I think all of this is a marital matter," she said. "I didn't know Emily owned the place, and I didn't know the details of Ethan's finances. I should leave." Emily turned her head toward her. "Sit down, Chloe." Her voice was not loud, but the mistress obeyed almost by reflex. "You can't keep me here," she protested. "I don't intend to keep you. I only want you to hear something before you decide what version of events you'll tell tomorrow. Emily signaled Jason, who handed the dining room manager an order to lock the reservation records, camera footage, consumption records, and payments linked to the table. Ethan frowned. What are you doing? Preserving evidence. This reservation was initially paid with a business account that does not belong to you. The wine, the jewelry, and the private room were charged to a company linked to a transaction, bearing my forged signature. I didn't come here only because my husband was dining with his mistress. I came because someone is trying to rob me. Every trace of arrogance vanished from Chloe's face. Ethan clenched his fists. You're exaggerating to get revenge. I can explain. Emily opened the divorce folder, pulled out one of the pages, and placed it in front of Jason. Do you recognize the name of this company? The director read in silence and nodded. New Horizon. It requested several investor events weeks ago, all managed by Ethan and Chloe. Part of the payments is still outstanding. Preserve every email, invoice, and recording related to that company, Emily ordered. No one deletes anything, and no one leaves with documentation from the restaurant. Jason bowed his head again. It will be done, Madam Chairwoman. Ethan took a step toward Emily, but the security supervisors discreetly moved between them. It was the first time that night he understood that the place where he had planned to display his power did not belong to him. The doors, the employees, and the private room did not obey his orders. Everything answered to the woman he had just called useless. Ethan's expression changed. Arrogance began to mix with fear. Emily, we can talk at home, he said in a lower tone. There's no need to turn a personal problem into a corporate scandal. She looked at Chloe's ring, the empty bottle, and the bill he had thrown against her chest. You chose to make it public. You brought me here to humiliate me in front of her and everyone present. I have only decided to stop protecting you. Ethan tried to touch her arm, but Emily moved away. You're letting anger control you. You know I never meant to hurt you. You forged my signature. It was a temporary solution. The project will make money. And when it failed, you planned to leave me with the debts while you walked away with Chloe. He looked at his mistress for support, but Chloe avoided his eyes. In that fraction of a second, Ethan realized that the woman for whom he was destroying his marriage might not remain by his side if he lost money, prestige, and contacts. Jason informed Emily that Thomas Reed was waiting in the lobby. Ethan flinched when he heard the lawyer's name. He had seen Thomas at several meetings, though he had always assumed he was an old friend of Emily's family. He did not know that Thomas legally represented Golden Crown Group, or that he had been reviewing financial movements for months. Bring him in, Emily said. Thomas entered carrying a gray briefcase and greeted everyone seriously. He placed copies of transfers, emails, and digital signature access records on the table. We have enough indications to request the freezing of several accounts, he explained. We have also detected that the divorce agreement attempts to assign Emily obligations she never authorized. Chloe stood again. I have nothing to do with this. Thomas opened a folder and showed a printed email. This address is yours, Ms. Bennett. In the message, you advise Ethan to obtain the signature before his wife discovers the project's true financial situation. Chloe dropped back into her chair. Ethan began speaking rapidly, mixing contradictory excuses. First, he said Chloe had misunderstood his instructions. Then, he insisted the project was safe. Finally, he accused Emily of pushing him into acting this way by hiding her fortune. Thomas listened without interrupting, taking notes. Emily remained silent until her husband ran out of words. 3 years ago, she said then, when your company was about to fire you, someone convinced an investor to finance your proposal. That someone was me. When your mother needed urgent surgery and the insurance company refused to cover it, a foundation paid the expenses. That was me too. When you won your first major contract, the company that trusted you belonged to one of my partners. I never told you because I wanted you to feel that your effort had value. Ethan looked at her, as if he had just discovered that his entire life rested on an invisible structure. Emily did not smile. I helped you without asking for obedience. You, on the other hand, accepted my support and turned it into contempt. Emily stood and picked up the black card. She did not put it away immediately. She held it in front of Ethan, not as a trophy, but as proof of everything he had never bothered to learn. You demanded that I pay for dinner with your mistress. I'm going to do it, but not the way you expected. The dinner will be recorded as evidence in the internal investigation. The cost will be claimed from the company you used, and every personal expense will have to be repaid. The jewelry will not leave the restaurant until it is determined who actually paid for it. Chloe looked at her ring and, for the first time, seemed ashamed. Ethan swallowed. You're going to destroy me over a dinner? Emily slowly shook her head. No, you started destroying yourself long before tonight. The dinner only turned on the light. Then she looked at Jason. I want to know why a man under investigation for using other people's funds was given access to the most exclusive room in my group. And I want every document before midnight. While Jason issued orders and Thomas organized the evidence, Emily walked toward the private room exit. The diners looked away, some out of respect, and others from second-hand embarrassment. Ethan called her name. He no longer sounded arrogant. He sounded desperate. Emily, wait. She stopped but did not turn around. Tomorrow you will speak to my lawyer. Tonight I will return home to collect my personal documents. You will not be there. Ethan tried to protest, but Thomas informed him that the residence belonged to a holding company linked to Golden Crown Group, and that his right of use could be suspended if there was a risk to the property. That revelation was the final blow. For years, Ethan had boasted about a house that had never been his, contacts built by others, and a success Emily had helped sustain from the shadows. Now everything was beginning to disappear, at the same table where he had tried to reduce her to a worthless wife. Before leaving the room, Emily looked at Chloe one last time. I don't hold you responsible for my husband no longer loving me. Every adult chooses whom they betray. But if you participated in the fraud, you will answer for it. Chloe lowered her eyes and clutched her handbag against her body. Then Emily looked at Ethan. She no longer saw the man she had loved, but someone who had confused patience with submission and generosity with dependence. The next time you force a woman to pay for your humiliation, she said, make sure you know who owns the place. She left without waiting for an answer. Behind her, Jason gave instructions to temporarily close access to the private room, while Thomas asked security to preserve every recording. Ethan remained standing beside the table, surrounded by luxury but completely alone. The bill was still there beside the unsigned divorce folder, and for the first time, he understood that that night he had not merely lost a wife, he had awakened the woman who could bring down everything he had built on a lie. 3 years before that night, at the Crown Madrid, Ethan Whitmore was not yet the man who spoke about power, contacts, and prestige as if he had been born surrounded by them. Back then, he lived in a small apartment in Chambery, owed several months of rent, and had spent weeks waking in the middle of the night with his chest tight from fear. His company was preparing layoffs, and he was convinced his name would be at the top of the list. Emily would find him sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee, and she never asked how much money he had left. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder and reminded him that one failure did not define anyone's life. Ethan loved her precisely for that. He said she was the only person in front of whom he could feel vulnerable without feeling ashamed. The only one who did not measure his worth by the car he drove, the suit he wore, or the number of contacts stored in his phone. Emily already ran several restaurants then, though most operated through companies whose names did not point directly to her. She had learned to protect her business identity after seeing how ambition and envy had destroyed her father. Jack Carter had been a brilliant cook who opened a small restaurant in Lavapiés using recipes inherited from his mother. For years he worked 16-hour days until a powerful hotel chain offered him a partnership that seemed impossible to refuse. They promised expansion, publicity, and stability, but ended up taking his recipes, draining the business accounts, and leaving him with debts he could never repay. Jack died believing he had failed, never knowing that his daughter had begun rebuilding from scratch everything that had been taken from him. Emily swore then that she would never allow money to become the center of a family relationship again. That was why, when she met Ethan, she spoke about her work as though describing a modest responsibility, not presenting an empire. The first time Ethan told her he was about to lose his job, Emily did not make a transfer. or hand him a check. She knew he would have felt humiliated. Instead, she called Henry Collins, an investor looking for sustainable real estate projects, and asked him to review a proposal forgotten in a drawer at the company where Ethan worked. The document contained mistakes, but it also contained a valuable idea: rehabilitating old buildings without driving neighborhood residents out. Henry agreed to hear him out without revealing who had requested the meeting. Ethan prepared the presentation all night and managed to convince him. A week later, he not only kept his job, but was promoted to lead the project. He came home with a bottle of cheap wine and tears in his eyes, hugged Emily in the hallway, and promised that one day he would repay everything she had endured by his side. Emily kissed him, without telling him that the opportunity had not appeared by chance. She wanted him to believe in himself, not to feel permanently indebted to her. During the first months of success, Ethan remained affectionate. He called Emily after every meeting, asked for her opinion on his speeches, and proudly spoke about her to the few colleagues who knew about their relationship. Yet as his income rose and he began attending more business dinners, the way he looked at her changed. At first, there were small remarks. Her dress seemed too simple. She should wear more striking jewelry. She could not show up at a gala with the same handbag as always. Then came comparisons with the wives of other executives, women who posted every trip, every gift, and every exclusive table on social media. Emily was not offended, but neither did she pretend to be someone else. She had spent too many years entering her own restaurants through the back doors, listening to waiters and cooks, to suddenly care about visible labels. Ethan mistook that indifference for lack of ambition. He never imagined that the handbag he criticized had belonged to her mother, or that Emily kept it because it was one of the few things she had left of her. Margaret Whitmore noticed the transformation in her son and decided to feed it. She had never fully accepted Emily. At first, she tolerated her because Ethan had nothing and the young woman seemed discreet. But when her son began to prosper, Margaret started talking about an appropriate wife for the family's new position. At every meal, she found a way to belittle Emily without raising her voice. She asked whether she was not bored depending financially on her husband. She commented that women without important family names tended to cling too tightly to marriage, and lamented that Ethan had not chosen someone with social connections. Emily answered politely, because she knew Margaret had raised her son alone, and understood a mother's fear of seeing him fall back into poverty. But understanding did not stop the words from hurting. Ethan almost never defended her. Sometimes he smiled to avoid an argument, and other times he asked Emily not to be so sensitive. Every silence from him was a small crack in the marriage, though neither of them wanted to acknowledge it. The situation changed permanently when Margaret needed urgent heart surgery. Her insurance refused to cover part of the procedure, and Ethan, despite his promotion, did not have enough liquidity. Emily contacted a medical foundation, supported by Golden Crown Group, and arranged for it to cover every expense. She said nothing, because she knew Margaret would reject the help if she knew where it came from. When the surgery went well, Ethan hugged his mother and celebrated the extraordinary luck of having found that institution. Margaret, far from feeling grateful to life, interpreted the episode as a sign that her son was destined to advance without owing anything to anyone. Months later, during a family dinner, she stated that Emily would never have been capable of saving them in a crisis because she had neither resources nor influence. Ethan remained silent. Emily looked at him, waiting for at least one word, but he simply cut his meat and changed the subject. That night, for the first time, she wondered whether protecting a man's pride could eventually become a way of feeding his contempt. Chloe Bennett appeared at a real estate presentation, held at a hotel on Gran Via. She worked as a public relations consultant and had an exceptional ability to identify who needed admiration. Ethan had just delivered a speech that received polite applause. Chloe approached him with a glass of cava and assured him that it had been the most brilliant presentation of the night. She did not ask about the project, but about him. She wanted to know how he had risen so quickly, what plans he had for the next 5 years, and why a man like him did not appear more often in the financial press. Ethan felt seen in a new way. Emily always listened to his doubts, but Chloe celebrated his ego. Days later, she sent him photographs from the event, and offered to help improve his public image. The relationship began with professional lunches, continued with late-night messages, and ended in a hotel room during a trip to Valencia. Ethan returned to Madrid convinced it meant nothing, but the next day he wrote to Chloe again before he had even greeted his wife. Chloe quickly understood that Ethan's greatest weakness was not desire but resentment. He needed to believe that someone was holding back his success. She chose Emily as the culprit. She repeatedly told him that a truly ambitious wife would accompany him to every event, cultivate strategic friendships, and make an effort to look worthy of his position. She said Emily benefited from his money without contributing image, contacts, or enthusiasm. Ethan began reinterpreting his entire marital history through those words. Emily's calm became apathy. Her discretion became mediocrity. Her refusal to show off became an inability to understand the business world. Chloe never asked where certain favors that kept opening doors for him came from. She preferred to attribute them to Ethan's talent, because a man convinced he created himself was easier to manipulate. Whenever he showed guilt over the affair, she embraced him and assured him that he was not betraying anyone, but finally choosing the life he deserved. Emily noticed the first changes before discovering any proof. Ethan began placing his phone face down, showering as soon as he returned from trips, and criticizing her over things that had once seemed insignificant to him. If she asked about a dinner, he accused her of controlling him. If she stayed silent, he complained that she showed no interest. Some nights he came home smelling of a sweet fragrance Emily did not wear. She knew what was happening, but she did not want to accept that the man she had helped stand back up was building a second life. She tried to talk to him without mentioning another woman. She asked whether he was happy, whether he felt trapped, whether they needed to seek help to save the marriage. Ethan replied that the problem was her failure to evolve. He said he had grown while she remained the same simple woman she had always been. Emily heard that sentence with deep sadness. To her, remaining faithful to her values was a strength. To him, it had become an embarrassment. Certainty arrived on a rainy afternoon. Ethan had left open on the shared computer a reservation confirmation for a vacation apartment in Barcelona. Chloe's name appeared as the second guest. Emily did not scream or break anything. She printed the document, placed it in a folder, and sat for an hour in front of the window. She remembered the man who had trembled in the kitchen for fear of losing his job, and wondered when he had begun to believe she did not even deserve the truth. When Ethan returned, Emily nearly confronted him. But he arrived with Margaret, who spoke excitedly about a future family investment. During dinner, Ethan suggested that Emily sign an authorization to simplify some tax procedures. She read the document and discovered that it allowed part of their joint assets to be used as collateral. She pretended not to understand it and asked for time. Ethan's immediate reaction, far too irritated for a simple administrative matter, triggered an alarm more dangerous than the affair. The next day, Emily called Thomas Reed. They had known each other since adolescence. He had been one of the few witnesses to Jack Carter's downfall and had helped Emily legally structure her first businesses. Thomas had never fully trusted Ethan, though he respected his friend's decision to separate her marriage from her company. When Emily showed him the authorization, the lawyer frowned. The company mentioned, New Horizon, had been created only a few months earlier and was linked to a developer with solvency problems. Thomas warned her that if she signed, she could end up liable for millions of euros. Emily asked for discretion and authorized a private audit of the joint financial movements. She did not want to destroy Ethan without knowing the whole truth. Part of her still hoped to find a less cruel explanation, a bad decision, outside pressure, or an error that could be corrected. Thomas agreed, though he reminded her that love did not obligate anyone to close their eyes to a crime. The audit revealed small transfers at first, payments at restaurants, hotels, and jewelry stores that Ethan justified as representation expenses. Then larger amounts appeared, sent to a consulting firm run by one of Chloe's cousins. From there, the money went to New Horizon. Emily also discovered that several transactions included a digital copy of her signature. The trace was nearly perfect, but the date corresponded to a day when she was in Seville supervising the opening of a restaurant. Thomas gathered flight records, emails, and bank access logs. Everything indicated that someone had used Emily's credentials from Ethan's office. While reviewing the movements, she found the purchase of the ring Chloe would wear on that future night, though she did not yet know where the story would end. The jewelry hurt, but not as much as a transfer made on their wedding anniversary. While Emily prepared dinner at home, Ethan had diverted an amount large enough to pay the annual salaries of several employees. Margaret had also begun to participate, though she believed she knew only part of the plan. Ethan told her that Emily was hiding a small family inheritance and refusing to invest it in his project. Margaret, convinced that everything acquired during the marriage morally belonged to her son, encouraged him to protect himself before the divorce. In a conversation accidentally recorded during a business call, she could be heard suggesting that Ethan transfer the debts to Emily and secure the house first. "Women like her act humble until the moment comes to take half," she said. "Don't let an outsider ruin everything you've built." Ethan did not correct the lie. He did not explain that Emily had never asked him for money or property. Nor did he mention that many of his advances had come from opportunities whose origin he did not know. He needed his mother to justify what he was doing. Margaret, for her part, needed to believe that protecting her son mattered more than distinguishing loyalty from abuse. Chloe pressed from another direction. The developer linked to New Horizon was in critical condition, and she would receive a considerable commission if she secured new guarantees. She had promised Ethan that the project would make him a partner in a major international deal, but she knew the numbers had been manipulated. In several messages, she insisted that he obtain Emily's signature before announcing the separation. "Afterward, it will be harder," she wrote. "While she still trusts you, you can get her to sign anything." Ethan replied that his wife understood nothing about finance, and that it would be enough to present the documents as routine household paperwork. Those words reached Thomas weeks later. When Emily read them, she felt something break permanently. Not because Ethan considered her ignorant, but because he planned to use the trust built over years as a tool to harm her. The betrayal was no longer an impulse of desire or an emotional crisis. It was a cold decision that turned every shared memory into a possible avenue for exploitation. Despite everything, Emily did not immediately change her routine. She continued getting up early, visiting kitchens, and returning home before Ethan arrived. She wanted to understand how far the plan went and who else was involved. She also needed to protect Golden Crown Group's employees and shareholders, because any fraud carried out with her identity could affect the entire group. Thomas recommended freezing the accounts, but Emily preferred to observe for a few more days while they put invisible controls in place. Every movement was recorded. Every email sent from the suspicious companies was copied. Every access to her digital signature triggered a silent alert. Ethan interpreted his wife's calm as naivety. He became bolder. He began talking about divorce with Chloe, promising that soon they would have a house in La Moraleja and travel without hiding. Meanwhile, he treated Emily with calculated coldness so that she would be the one to ask for separation and appear responsible for the marriage's failure. One night, Ethan left a catalog of luxury homes on the table. Emily asked whether he was thinking of moving, and he replied that he was only studying the market. Days later, Margaret suggested that perhaps Emily should accept an amicable separation, because a man with Ethan's prospects needed freedom. Emily understood that they were preparing the ground. The family that had once received her as a temporary companion was now trying to push her out without knowing who had sustained many of their securities. Even so, she did not reveal her business identity. Thomas asked why she was still silent when one phone call could end Ethan's arrogance. Emily replied that she needed to know whether her husband would regret the betrayal itself or only regret choosing the wrong person to betray. If he learned about her fortune too soon, she would never have that answer. He could pretend to love her, ask forgiveness, and blame Chloe. Emily wanted to observe him while he still believed she had nothing to offer him. The decisive moment came when Ethan sent her a message, inviting her to dinner at the Crown Madrid. The choice of restaurant surprised Emily. He knew it was one of the most exclusive establishments in the city, but he had no idea who stood behind the group. The message spoke of ending things civilly and asked her to bring identification. Thomas suspected that Ethan would try to obtain a final signature. Shortly afterward, An internal alert showed that the private room had been reserved in the name of New Horizon, and that Chloe was listed as a guest. Emily stared at the screen for several seconds. It was crueler than she had expected. Ethan did not merely intend to present divorce documents. He planned to do it in front of his mistress, forcing Emily to witness her replacement, and perhaps using shame to secure a quick signature. Thomas proposed accompanying her, but Emily chose to go in alone and keep him nearby. She needed Ethan to feel completely secure before revealing his intentions. Before leaving home, Emily opened a box stored at the back of her closet. Inside was the black Golden Crown Group card, a credential she rarely used in public. It did not represent a bank account or a fortune available for luxury. It was the access key to the group's entire structure: internal systems, financial records, security protocols, and immediate executive authority. She held it between her fingers and remembered her father serving tables in an almost empty restaurant, thanking every customer as if they were the first. Jack always said that a restaurant revealed a person's true manners because, in front of those who served them, many people stopped pretending. Emily placed the card in her handbag without knowing exactly when she would use it. She did not want to turn the dinner into a display of power, but neither would she allow Ethan to destroy evidence or drag innocent employees into his fraud. When she closed the door, she felt she was no longer heading out to save her marriage. She was going to say goodbye to the version of herself that had confused patience with hope. As Emily made her way toward the restaurant, Ethan and Chloe were celebrating in advance. He assured her that his wife would sign because she lacked the resources to fight a long legal battle. Chloe ordered the most expensive wine on the menu and suggested adding a piece of jewelry to the service, convinced they would soon live on the money obtained from the project. Neither of them noticed that the employees recorded every request in a system connected directly to Golden Crown Group's central office. Ethan spoke about Emily as though she were a domestic burden he could finally abandon. Chloe imagined the moment when she would take her place at meetings, on trips, and in photographs. Both believed they had chosen the perfect setting to close one chapter. They did not understand that the walls, the cameras, the invoices, and even the tablecloth on which they would place the documents belonged to the woman they intended to humiliate. And when Emily walked through the doors of the Crown Madrid, she no longer carried any doubt about the infidelity. The only thing she still did not know was how much harm Ethan was willing to cause her to finance the life he had promised his mistress. Ethan took several seconds to react after hearing that Emily was the founder and chairwoman of Golden Crown Group. His face moved from disbelief to anger, as if the revelation were a personal offense rather than the consequence of years of indifference. He looked at the lamps, the artwork, and the employees waiting for instructions, trying to find some crack in Jason's explanation. "This is a performance," he finally said. "Emily arranged all of this to humiliate me, because she knows I want a divorce." Chloe recovered some of her arrogance when she heard him and raised her phone to call the police. She claimed that a resentful woman had stolen a corporate credential and bribed the staff. Jason did not lose his composure. He ordered the private room door closed to protect the privacy of the other guests and asked that no one touch the bill, the divorce folder, or the payment terminal. Emily remained standing beside the table, watching as her husband preferred to invent a conspiracy rather than admit that he had never cared to know her. Chloe dialed the emergency number, but Thomas asked her to wait before making a false accusation. "You can call," the lawyer said calmly, "although you will have to explain why you appear in emails related to a forged signature and the diversion of funds from an insolvent company." Chloe lowered the phone without completing the call. Ethan moved in front of her as though he wanted to protect her and accused Thomas of threatening them. The lawyer opened his briefcase and showed a judicial authorization to preserve documentation obtained after Emily's financial team detected irregular access. There was not yet an arrest warrant or a judgment, but the evidence was enough to begin serious proceedings. Ethan tried to snatch one of the papers from him. The security supervisors stepped in without touching him, forming a silent barrier. For the first time, the executive understood that his orders no longer impressed anyone. The staff who only minutes earlier had treated his demands with courtesy now waited only for Emily's instructions. Jason asked Emily for permission to display the necessary corporate information. She nodded. making it clear that they should show only data that would not harm employees or outside partners. The dining room manager activated the screen built into the private room wall, normally used for private meetings. The Golden Crown Group organizational chart appeared, followed by the parent company's commercial registry record and the composition of the board of directors. Emily Carter's name appeared as founder, executive chairwoman, and holder of the majority of voting rights. The creation dates of every restaurant also appeared, from the first location in Lavapiés to the openings in Barcelona, Seville, Valencia, and Marbella. Chloe read the figures with her lips parted. Ethan, meanwhile, desperately searched for an alternative explanation. "It could be another Emily Carter," he murmured. Jason enlarged an institutional photograph in which Emily appeared beside chefs, investors, and workers during the group's 10th anniversary. She wore neither a gala dress nor flashy jewelry. She wore a white chef's jacket and held her father's old recipe notebook. The silence became unbearable for Ethan. He remembered seeing that photograph once in Emily's office, but never asking about it. He had assumed it was from a charity event or that she was a friend of someone in hospitality. Now every ignored detail returned like an accusation. "Why did you hide this?" he asked, raising his voice. "Why did you let all of us think you had nothing?" Emily did not look away. "I never said I had nothing. I said I worked in hospitality and preferred to keep my professional life separate from our marriage. You were the one who decided that work was not worth paying attention to. When I tried to tell you about the group's expansion, you told me restaurants were small matters compared with your real estate projects." Ethan wanted to deny it, but he remembered that the conversation had happened during their 2nd anniversary. While Emily tried to tell him that a new opening would create more than 100 jobs, he had interrupted her to talk about a dinner with investors. That night, like so many others, she had remained silent rather than turn the marriage into a competition. Chloe slowly stood and placed the diamond ring on the table, as if separating herself from the jewelry could separate her from the fraud. "Ethan told me Emily had only received a small inheritance. I didn't know this company was hers. I didn't know the accounts belonged to the group either." Emily looked at the ring and then at the woman who half an hour earlier had toasted to taking her place. "I don't need you to explain how much you knew about my wealth," she replied. "I need to know how much you knew about my signature." Chloe quickly denied knowing anything. She claimed the messages could have been taken out of context and that her only role was to bring in investors. Thomas placed copies of several emails in front of her. In one, Chloe suggested using marital trust before Emily discovered the maneuver. In another, she asked whether Ethan could access his wife's digital certificate. Chloe claimed she was only repeating instructions from an advisor. Thomas asked her to name the advisor. She opened her mouth but could not find an answer capable of sustaining the lie. Emily picked up the black card and placed it on the tablecloth again. "This is not a bank card," she explained, addressing Ethan and Chloe. "It cannot pay for a dinner, and it is not proof of how much money I have. It is an executive credential of Golden Crown Group. When a manager recognizes it, they must activate a security protocol, protect the accounts, preserve recordings, and block any suspicious operation." Ethan looked at the object as though it were a weapon. The entire scene of power he had imagined had been turned completely upside down. He had intended to force his wife to pay, but the card had not settled the bill. It had stopped the financial structure used to organize her humiliation. Jason confirmed that from the moment Emily placed the credential on the table, all New Horizon transactions were frozen within the internal system. No employee could modify the reservation, delete consumption records, or replace the payment method. Every minute of that night would be preserved as evidence. Chloe then understood that her phone, her messages, and even the jewelry order could connect her directly to the plan. Ethan tried to regain control through indignation. He claimed that using corporate protocols to resolve a marital conflict was an abuse of power. Thomas reminded him that the investigation had not begun because of the affair, but because of financial movements, document forgery, and unauthorized use of companies linked to Emily. "Sleeping with another person is not the crime we are examining," he clarified. "The problem is that you tried to turn your wife's trust into financial collateral without her consent." Ethan insisted everything had been a temporary investment, and that he intended to repay the money when the project generated profits. Emily asked why. Then, the divorce agreement transferred the debts exclusively into her name. He replied that lawyers had drafted the clauses, and that he did not know every detail. Thomas pulled out an email sent from Ethan's personal account, in which he demanded that Emily be made responsible for the guarantees. The final sentence was unequivocal. Once she signs, we can cut her out without leaving her any ability to claim anything. Chloe moved away from Ethan, though she still tried to maintain appearances. "You told me she had agreed to the investment," she whispered. "You said you only needed to organize the documents before you separated." Ethan looked at her furiously. "Don't start pretending you're innocent now. You knew the project and wanted the commission." The accusation escaped his lips before he could stop it. Thomas wrote down the statement, and Chloe went pale. Emily showed no satisfaction. She knew that guilty people, once they felt trapped, began destroying one another. "What commission?" she asked. Chloe maintained that it was a legitimate percentage for bringing in investors, but Jason reported that part of the restaurant expenses had been charged to an account used to present private encounters as professional meetings. The mistress denied authorizing those invoices. Ethan replied that it had been her idea to turn the dinners into business expenses. In less than a minute, the couple who had been celebrating their future began exchanging accusations in front of everyone. Thomas then showed the access logs for Emily's digital signature. The certificate had been used from Ethan's office on several nights when he claimed to be working late. Chloe appeared on the building's security cameras on 2 of those dates. There were also messages in which she asked how long the system would take to send a notification to the owner. Ethan claimed Emily had given him verbal permission months earlier, but she firmly denied it. "I gave you access to a domestic folder to pay shared taxes, not to my corporate certificate. Did you know the difference?" He tried to defend himself by saying he had never understood the scale of his wife's businesses. Thomas pointed out that ignorance did not justify copying credentials or forging authorizations. Emily then remembered a night when Ethan had asked for her phone to connect a security device. She was preparing a restaurant visit and had suspected nothing. Now she understood that he had probably used those minutes to reset a password and gain access to documents that had never belonged to him. The private room door opened again, and Margaret Whitmore entered, accompanied by a driver. She had received an urgent call from Ethan and arrived convinced Emily was causing a scandal to prevent the divorce. She wore an elegant coat and an expression of authority that vanished when she saw the security supervisors, Thomas, and the screen displaying her daughter-in-law's name. "What does all this mean?" she asked. Ethan approached her and spoke quickly, explaining that Emily had hidden for years that she owned a large company and was now using her influence to destroy him. Margaret looked at Emily in disbelief. She knew Emily had received some money from her father, but she had never imagined a fortune of that scale. "Then you deceived us from the beginning," she declared. "You entered this family, pretending to be a humble woman so you could test us." Emily replied that she had never tested anyone. She had simply wanted a life in which affection did not depend on an account balance. Margaret did not ask about the forged signatures or the debts. Her first concern was her son's reputation. She approached Emily and lowered her voice, trying to turn the harm into a private family matter. "Whatever Ethan has done, you cannot let it leave this room. Think about the years you shared. Think about our family." Emily felt a bitter clarity. For years, she had secretly financed that woman's medical recovery. She had endured her contempt and defended, to others, the love she felt for her son. Now Margaret was not asking for truth, but silence. "Did you also think about our family when you advised him to leave the debts to me?" Emily asked. Margaret pretended not to understand. Thomas played a recording lawfully obtained during a call related to the operation. Margaret's voice filled the private room, recommending that they use Emily's inheritance before she could claim it. The woman's face tightened. "I was only trying to protect my son," she said. "I didn't know the amounts, and I didn't know the signature could be false." "You always say you were protecting your son," Emily replied, "but you never asked yourself what he needed protection from. Ethan was not being attacked. He was using my trust to finance an operation he was hiding, even from his own partners." Margaret insisted Emily could solve the problem without going to the authorities. She reminded her of the heart surgery and said a family had to help one another in difficult moments. The irony was so painful that Jason lowered his gaze. Emily took a breath before revealing the truth. The foundation that paid for your surgery belongs to Golden Crown Group. I personally authorized every expense. Margaret stood motionless. For years, she had despised the woman who guaranteed the treatment that saved her life. Ethan also seemed unable to process it. Emily continued, explaining that she had never told them because she did not want anyone to feel emotional indebtedness. I wasn't expecting gratitude, she said, but I never imagined you would use my generosity as proof that I contributed nothing. Margaret parted her lips, though no apology came out. The tension increased when Thomas presented a preliminary report on New Horizon. The developer had manipulated sales forecasts and hidden outstanding obligations. If it obtained new guarantees, it could appear solvent for a few months, but collapse was almost inevitable. Chloe knew part of that information because she had participated in meetings with the administrators. Ethan argued that he trusted in a market recovery and that many successful ventures began by taking risks. Emily reminded him that a risk was legitimate only when the person assuming it knew it existed. You wanted profits for yourself and debts for me. That isn't entrepreneurial courage. It is fraud. Ethan struck the back of a chair and accused everyone of trying to turn a bad decision into a crime. Thomas asked him to calm down and pointed out that he would still have the opportunity to give a statement with legal assistance. The word statement changed Margaret's expression. For the first time, she understood that the Whitmore name and their social contacts might not be enough to stop what was coming. Emily then asked them to play another file. Thomas connected a small device to the room system. Ethan's voice emerged with devastating clarity. He was speaking with Chloe inside his car, unaware that a backup application had preserved an audio note activated by mistake. In the recording, he said Emily would sign because she trusted him too much. He said that once the debts were in her name, they could throw her out of the house and present her as a resentful wife, trying to keep assets built by her husband. Chloe laughed and asked whether Emily suspected the affair. Ethan replied that it did not matter, because a woman without resources could not fight for long. No one spoke when the recording ended. Emily had heard those words before, but hearing them in front of the man who said them reopened the wound. There was no anger in the recording, no confusion, no regret, only calculation, contempt, and certainty that his wife was too weak to defend herself. Ethan tried to disconnect the device, but security stopped him. "That was a private conversation," he shouted. "It doesn't mean I was actually going to do it. Everyone says things when they're angry." Emily watched him with a calm that disarmed him. "You weren't angry. You were making plans after dinner with your mistress." He changed strategy and claimed the recording had been manipulated. Thomas replied that independent experts would analyze it and that there were matching messages for every detail mentioned. Chloe began to cry, though her fear seemed directed more toward the legal consequences than the harm caused. Margaret took her son's hand and asked Emily to remember the man she had loved. "That man hasn't existed for a long time," she answered. "Maybe he never existed the way I imagined him." Ethan looked at her with hatred and desperation. "You can't erase our marriage just because you feel powerful now." Emily put the black card back into her handbag. "I don't feel powerful. I feel free from having to keep believing your lies." Jason returned with a report of the reservations made by Ethan during the previous 8 months. He had used Golden Crown Group restaurants in Madrid, Valencia, and Barcelona to meet with Chloe and New Horizon representatives. On several occasions, he demanded discounts by claiming that his wife had contacts with management. That produced a mixture of indignation and shame among the employees. Ethan had exploited his relationship with Emily, even while mocking her for supposedly having no influence. He had also mistreated waiters, threatened to file complaints, and used his wife's name to obtain privileges. Emily asked that every incident be reviewed and that affected workers be compensated. "No one will be punished for giving in to pressure that carried my name," she clarified. Jason nodded. To her, the priority was not revenge but repairing the damage Ethan had caused by using authority he never possessed. He heard the order and understood that even his everyday arrogance had been recorded inside the empire he had despised. Margaret slowly sat down. Her confidence had disappeared, but she still searched for a way out. She proposed that Ethan repay the money, end things with Chloe, and accept a discreet separation. Chloe raised her head indignantly when she heard herself treated as a disposable piece. Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked at Emily and, for an instant, calculated whether an apology might preserve part of what he was losing. She recognized that look. It was not love, it was survival. "I don't want negotiations tonight," she said. "The documents will be examined, the accounts will remain frozen, and every person involved will have to answer for their actions." Margaret said that would destroy her son's career. Emily answered that a career built on stolen signatures could not be protected by sacrificing the victim. Thomas reported that the following day, they would communicate the facts to the board of directors of Ethan's real estate company. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, as if he had finally found a defense capable of reassuring him. "You can stage whatever spectacle you want," he declared, recovering part of his arrogant tone. "But my company will not fire me over a marital argument. I have contracts, partners, and people who depend on me. Besides, the house is in my name, and my personal investments are enough to face any accusation. I'm not an employee of your restaurants, Emily. You cannot take everything away from me with an order." Thomas exchanged a glance with her, but did not yet reveal what he knew about the residents or the shareholders who controlled Ethan's company. Emily understood that her husband still believed there were two separate worlds, the small domestic universe where he could humiliate her, and the big corporate world where he was untouchable. "Then you have nothing to fear," she replied. "Tomorrow we'll see how much of what you call yours was actually built without using my name, my contacts, or my money." Ethan smiled, clinging to his last illusion of superiority. He still did not know that the house, his position, and the company he believed would protect him were tied to Emily through connections he had never bothered to discover. The next morning, Ethan arrived at his company's building, convinced he could still regain control. He had spent the night at a hotel, calling old partners, clients, and acquaintances who used to laugh at his jokes during business dinners. Some did not answer, others claimed to be busy. He interpreted those silences as temporary caution, not the beginning of his fall. He entered the lobby in a wrinkled suit and demanded that the receptionist prepare a room for an urgent meeting. The young woman avoided looking at him and explained that his access card had been suspended. Ethan struck the counter, accusing her of making a mistake, until two security staff members approached. At that moment, Richard Montgomery, chairman of the board, appeared with the legal director. He did not offer Ethan his hand. He asked him to surrender the corporate phone and come upstairs with them to hear the resolution adopted during the night. In the boardroom, Ethan discovered that Thomas had sent a preliminary report containing evidence of forgery, suspicious transfers, and conflicts of interest related to New Horizon. On the table were copies of emails, invoices, and access logs he believed buried inside private systems. Ethan claimed Emily was using her fortune to destroy him over an affair. Richard interrupted him and clarified that the board was not judging his private life, but the legal risk created by his decisions. The developer had supplied false information to several investors and had used the name of a person outside the project to back multi-million euro transactions. In addition, two important clients had requested explanations after discovering that their meetings had been linked to personal expenses. As the reading continued, Ethan realized none of his colleagues was willing to defend him. Those who for years had toasted his success now studied documents without looking up. Ethan tried to remind them that he had secured some of the company's most important contracts. He said his departure would cause loss of business and a crisis of confidence. Richard listened to the end and then revealed something Ethan did not know. Collins Capital controlled a decisive block of shares and had demanded his immediate suspension. Henry Collins's name sounded familiar. He was the investor who years earlier had backed Ethan's first proposal, the opportunity Ethan had always considered definitive proof of his talent. Why would Collins get involved in a marital problem? Ethan asked. The legal director answered that Henry was not acting because of Emily as a wife, but because she was the chairwoman of a group affected by fraudulent use of her credentials. She also explained that Collins Capital had originally invested in the company after a personal recommendation from Emily. Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Even the beginning of his career was connected to the woman he had called useless. The resolution was read without drama: immediate suspension from all duties, prohibition on access to corporate files, and the opening of an external audit. Ethan would retain the right to defend himself, but he could not represent the company or contact clients in its name. When he refused to hand over the phone, security approached again. He looked at Richard, hoping for some sign of friendship, some memory of shared nights or exchanged favors. The chairman merely said he had trusted him, and that precisely because of that trust, the disappointment was greater. Ethan placed the device on the table and was escorted to the elevator. In the hallway, several employees pretended to focus on their screens. Some knew about his humiliations, his shouting, and his habit of taking credit for the work of others. No one celebrated his fall, but not a single person approached to ask whether he needed help. The man who had once boasted of controlling every room left the building like an unwelcome visitor. From the sidewalk, he called Chloe. He needed to hear that at least she was still on his side, but the call was rejected 3 times. Finally, he received a message asking for space and saying her lawyers had advised her to cut off all communication. Ethan replied by accusing her of cowardice. Chloe took less than a minute to answer that he had lied to her about the source of the money, ownership of the house, and the true state of the project. According to her, she was a victim too. Those words ignited his fury. He reminded her of the emails, the promised commission, and the instructions to obtain Emily's signature. Chloe stopped replying. Ethan got into a taxi and ordered the driver to take him to the apartment he had rented for her. During the ride, he imagined a conversation in which they would join forces, deny the accusations, and blame Emily. He still did not understand that Chloe had never loved a man. She had loved the version of success he represented. The apartment was almost empty when he arrived. Chloe's suitcases, several dresses, and the documents she kept in a bedroom drawer were gone. On the table, he found a short note telling him not to look for her. Ethan walked through the rooms, calling her name, as though she might be hiding behind a door. Then he discovered that the lease was 2 months behind because Chloe had canceled the associated card. The jewelry store had also sent a notice demanding final payment for the ring left behind at the Crown. Everything that had seemed like shared luxury was turning into debt. Ethan called Margaret and asked her to go to the family home. His mother answered in a trembling voice. 2 legal representatives from a company called Carter Holdings were there, reviewing an inventory and communicating new access restrictions. Ethan believed Emily had acted out of revenge during the night. He ordered his mother not to sign anything and rushed toward the residence he had presented for years as a symbol of his success. When he reached the gated community, his code no longer opened the main entrance. The guard recognized him, but explained that he had instructions to verify every entry. Ethan shouted that he was the owner and threatened to have him fired. The man endured the insults until a lawyer from Carter Holdings appeared with land registry documentation. The house had never belonged to Ethan. It had been purchased by a real estate investment company linked to Golden Crown Group and temporarily granted to the couple under a right-of-use agreement. Emily had signed that agreement to provide stability without transferring ownership. Ethan could continue removing his personal belongings, but his authorization to live there had been suspended because of the risk that documents and corporate assets might disappear. Margaret watched from the entrance, pale and humiliated. For years she had boasted to her friends about the mansion bought by her son. Now she discovered that every room in which she had criticized Emily indirectly belonged to the woman she had despised. "This is theft," Ethan shouted when Emily appeared at the end of the hallway accompanied by Thomas. She was dressed simply and carried a box containing personal documents. There were no guards surrounding her, and no triumphant expression. She looked tired but firm. Ethan accused her of pretending to love him while keeping all the assets under her control. Emily replied that ownership of the residence had never been a secret. The agreement had remained filed with the marital documents, and Ethan had signed it without reading because he was convinced that any paper presented by his wife was unimportant. He demanded to keep the house as compensation for the years of marriage. Thomas explained that joint marital assets would be analyzed in the divorce, but the residence belonged to a company created before the marriage. You set a trap for me from the beginning, Ethan insisted. Emily slowly shook her head. I offered you a home. You were the one who decided to turn it into a stage for lies, secret meetings, and plans to throw me out. Margaret intervened, begging them to speak without lawyers. She reminded Emily of shared Christmases, illnesses, and the times when they had supposedly functioned as a family. Yet every memory came with a demand. Withdraw the accusations, protect Ethan's reputation, and allow them to keep the house. Emily listened in silence before asking whether Margaret had ever really considered her part of that family. Margaret said yes, but could not hold her gaze. Emily remembered the dinners where she had been called an opportunist, the galas where her mother-in-law pretended not to know her, and the night she advised Ethan to leave her with all the debts. A family does not demand sacrifices only from the person it has decided to despise, Emily said. I am not taking anything away from you. I have simply stopped giving you what you used to hurt me. Margaret began to cry, though she still did not apologize for the harm caused. Ethan approached Emily and lowered his voice. His anger suddenly turned into a desperate tenderness she knew too well. He reminded her of the small apartment in Chamber, the nights when they dreamed of a better life, and the promise to stay together even when everything went wrong. He said Chloe had taken advantage of a period of insecurity, that business pressure made him vulnerable, and that he had never intended to cause irreversible harm. Emily felt pain hearing that version. Part of her wanted to recognize the man from the past, but she knew she could not confuse memory with reality. You didn't forge my signature in a moment of weakness, she replied. You did it several times. You didn't humiliate me by accident. You booked a table, invited your mistress, prepared documents, and calculated how to leave me defenseless. Ethan extended a hand toward her. I still love you. Emily stepped back. Yesterday, you were certain I was worth nothing. Today, you have only discovered how much I own. The question Emily asked next left everyone silent. Would you still be saying you love me if Jason had not recognized the black card? Ethan opened his mouth but did not answer. She continued. If the payment had been declined, if I did not own the restaurant, and if I had no lawyers, would you have withdrawn the agreement? Would you have defended my dignity in front of Chloe? Would you have given up the money taken with my signature? Each question destroyed another excuse. Ethan looked at his mother, then at Thomas, and finally at the floor. He could not lie convincingly, because everyone had witnessed his cruelty. Emily understood that his silence was the only honest answer she would receive. For years she had waited for an explanation, capable of saving something of their shared love. Now she knew Ethan's regret had not been born when he saw her suffer. It had appeared when he lost his job, the house, and access to a fortune he had not known existed. A vehicle stopped in front of the residence, and Chloe got out, accompanied by a lawyer. She had returned because some personal documents remained in the office used by Ethan. When she saw him, she stayed close to the door. He moved toward her furiously, asking why she had run away and what information she had given the authorities. Chloe replied that she was protecting herself. Her lawyer clarified that she would cooperate with the investigation and provide emails, messages, and names of New Horizon officials. In exchange, she would ask that her cooperation be considered when responsibility was determined. Ethan called her a traitor. Chloe gave a bitter laugh. You promised me a life that was never yours. The house belonged to Emily. Your contracts came through Emily. Even the restaurant where you were planning to propose to me belongs to Emily. What part of you was real? The question was cruel, but also accurate. Ethan tried to blame her for manipulating him. Chloe replied that he had needed very little pressure to despise his wife. The argument became more heated when Chloe revealed that Ethan had known for months that New Horizon was near insolvency. He had received a financial report warning that the promised profits were impossible without new guarantees. Instead of withdrawing, he decided to use the assets he attributed to Emily to cover the hole and preserve his image as a successful executive. Chloe admitted encouraging him because she expected a commission, but she claimed Ethan was the one who proposed transferring the debts during the divorce. He denied the accusation and lunged toward the folder carried by her lawyer. The gated community security officers stopped him before he could snatch it. Margaret shouted her son's name, horrified to see him struggling. Emily did not intervene. For a long time, she had solved every crisis before Ethan felt its consequences. This time she allowed everyone to see how he reacted when the world stopped obeying him. Thomas received a call and moved a few steps away. When he returned, he reported that the Financial Crimes Unit was on its way there to formally request devices and documentation related to the transfers. Ethan accused Emily of calling the police to humiliate him in front of the neighbors. She replied that she had handed over evidence and that the authorities decided when to act. "I cannot order an arrest, and I do not want to," she clarified. "The law is not an extension of my revenge. Precisely for that reason, I will not stop them from investigating," Margaret begged again, this time offering to sell some jewelry to repay the money. Thomas explained that the problem was not limited to a financial amount. There were forged signatures, misleading statements to investors, and possible destruction of records. Repayment might repair part of the harm, but it could not erase the decisions. Emily looked at her mother-in-law and understood that she was still searching for a solution in which Ethan would not have to assume full responsibility. When the agents arrived, they showed the appropriate authorization and asked to speak with each person separately. They did not handcuff Ethan or treat him as guilty before a ruling. They informed him of his rights and requested his laptop, several phones, and access codes to certain accounts. He initially refused, claiming the devices contained confidential information from his former company. An agent explained that the company had already authorized surrender of the corporate devices, and that concealing material could worsen his situation. Ethan looked at Emily, expecting her to intervene. She remained beside the window, holding the box in which she kept photographs, letters, and her father's recipe notebook. Finally, Ethan handed over his personal phone. The gesture seemed small, but it represented the collapse of the last boundary he believed he controlled. Every message sent to Chloe, every instruction to intermediaries, and every mockery of his wife would be exposed to eyes he could not intimidate. During the authorized search of the office, the agents found a folder Ethan claimed not to recognize. Inside were contract drafts, copies of Emily's digital certificate, and a list of assets he planned to claim after the divorce. There was also a document prepared for investors in which Emily's forged signature falsely identified her as the principal guarantor. Ethan accused Chloe of putting the folder there. She replied that she had no access to the residence without him present. Margaret covered her mouth when she recognized her own handwriting on a note attached to one of the documents. "Secure the house before talking to her." The woman explained that she had only meant protecting the family residence, but the agents preserved the note as part of the evidence. Emily felt a quiet sadness. She took no pleasure in watching anyone fall. Yet every discovery confirmed that she would have lost far more than a marriage if she had signed that night. The search also revealed that Ethan planned to transfer part of the money to an account in Portugal controlled by an intermediary. Chloe claimed she knew nothing about that movement and realized he had intended to deceive her too. Their cooperation ended completely. She handed over her own phone and pointed to messages in which Ethan promised to divide the profits after Emily became tied to the debts. In another conversation, however, he told the intermediary that Chloe would not receive the agreed amount, because she could be replaced once the operation was closed. When she read it, Chloe stopped defending any supposed feelings. She looked at Ethan with a mixture of hatred and shame. She had participated in another woman's destruction, believing she would be rewarded, but she had only been the next person on the list of those he was willing to use. Emily did not feel immediate compassion. Though she recognized in Chloe's face the same painful discovery, Ethan had never loved anyone who could not serve his ambition. At dusk, the agents asked Ethan to accompany them to give a formal statement. It was not yet a conviction, but he could no longer pretend everything was a domestic dispute. Margaret clung to his arm and promised to find the best lawyer. He turned his head toward Emily. For an instant, he seemed to search for one last phrase capable of moving her. "After everything we lived through, you're going to let them take me away like this?" Emily moved close enough to speak without shouting. "They are not taking you because you stopped loving me. They are taking you to ask about forged documents and money that was not yours. I did not choose your actions. I only stopped hiding their consequences." Ethan wanted to respond, but the agent told him to move forward. The neighbors watched from the windows, The same neighbors in front of whom Margaret had boasted about her son's career and the family mansion. Now he crossed the doorway with no position, no mistress, and no home. After the vehicle left, Margaret remained seated on the entrance steps. She seemed to have aged several years in a single day. She looked at Emily and, for the first time, offered an apology without attaching an immediate demand. She admitted that she had judged Emily by her clothes, by her silence, and by a surname that did not appear in society magazines. She also acknowledged that she had fed Ethan's arrogance, because every promotion her son received allowed her to forget the years of deprivation. Emily listened without moving closer. The apology did not erase the harm, but at least it contained truth. "I wanted to believe he deserved everything he got," Margaret said. "And whenever a problem appeared, I looked for someone else to blame." Emily replied that loving a child did not mean protecting him from responsibility. Sometimes the only way to prevent him from destroying himself completely was to stop justifying him. Chloe left the residence with her lawyer after handing over the last pieces of evidence. Before leaving, she stopped in front of Emily. She tried to apologize, but the words sounded incomplete. She said Ethan had assured her the marriage was over, and that Emily remained only for convenience. Emily replied that such a lie might explain the beginning of a relationship, but not the emails about signatures, commissions, and debts. Chloe lowered her gaze. "You're right. I wanted to believe it because it suited me." Then she confessed that she had chosen the crown for the dinner, because she wanted to prove she could publicly occupy Emily's place. She had never imagined she was walking into the business of the woman she intended to humiliate. Emily did not answer with cruelty. She only told her that ambition was no excuse to stop recognizing another person's humanity. Chloe left without the ring, without Ethan, and without the bright future she had used to justify her actions. When everyone was gone, Emily slowly walked through the rooms. On a shelf, she found a photograph from her wedding. Ethan looked at her in the image with an emotion that seemed genuine. Emily wondered whether the love had existed and become corrupted, or whether she had simply loved a promise he never knew how to keep. She kept the photograph instead of tearing it up. She did not need to destroy the past in order to accept that the future would be different. Thomas reminded her that the criminal case, the audit, and the divorce still lay ahead. Emily nodded. She was tired, but she no longer felt afraid. The woman who had entered the restaurant the night before, searching for one final explanation, had disappeared. In her place remained someone willing to reclaim her name, protect her company, and allow the truth to move forward without using power to crush anyone. Ethan had lost almost everything in a single day, but his real defeat was not financial. He had discovered too late that the person he considered weak was the only one who had supported him without demanding that he kneel. 6 months after that night at the Crown Madrid, the case against Ethan Whitmore reached the courts. The investigation confirmed that he had used Emily's digital certificate without authorization, forged documents, diverted funds, and presented misleading information to several investors to keep alive a real estate operation destined to fail. Experts demonstrated that the signatures were not administrative mistakes, but part of a carefully prepared sequence. Every access coincided with meetings between Ethan and Chloe, transfers to intermediary companies, and messages about the future divorce. The defense tried to present the facts as desperate decisions made under pressure, but the existence of drafts, asset lists, and recordings destroyed that version. Emily attended the hearings without flashy jewelry or gestures of victory. She sat beside Thomas, listened to the testimony, and remembered that the man accused in front of her had shared her bed, her fears, and an important part of her life. Chloe was one of the first to testify. She had signed a cooperation agreement with prosecutors and surrendered her devices, emails, and documents. She admitted that she knew about New Horizons' financial risk, that she expected to receive a commission, and that she pressured Ethan to obtain Emily's signature before the divorce. She also confessed that she had enjoyed the planned humiliation at the restaurant because she wanted to publicly take the wife's place. Her voice trembled when she explained that she believed she could control Ethan, only to discover too late that he also intended to deceive her and reduce her share of the money. The confession did not eliminate her responsibility, though it helped clarify the entire structure of the fraud. Chloe received a lesser sentence, financial obligations, and a temporary prohibition on participating in certain business operations. Outside the courtroom, she avoided reporters. The woman who had wanted to appear in photographs beside powerful men learned that visibility could become a form of shame when built on lies. Margaret also had to testify. Her note found in the office, the recordings, and several messages showed that she had encouraged her son to secure the house and the assets before speaking to Emily. There was not enough evidence to attribute to her full knowledge of the forgery, but it was clear that she had supported a strategy designed to leave her daughter-in-law in a vulnerable position. In front of the judge, Margaret abandoned for the first time the language of family and prestige. She admitted that she had confused maternal protection with permission to do harm. She acknowledged that she despised Emily because her simplicity reminded her of the years of poverty she wanted to forget. After the hearing, she sold jewelry, an inherited apartment, and part of her investments to help repair some of the losses. No one forced her to do it. Emily did not ask her to. It was Margaret's first decision that did not seek to save Ethan's image, but to accept that her own words had also helped build the road to his downfall. Ethan's real estate company sought compensation from him for reputational damage, audit expenses, and the loss of several contracts. New Horizon officially entered insolvency, and its administrators became subject to separate investigations. Ethan's personal assets were partially seized, his accounts were restricted, and the contacts who once answered in seconds stopped recognizing him. Some financial newspapers published his case as an example of internal fraud and conflict of interest. He, who had dreamed of appearing in the press as a great executive, ended up becoming a warning. The sentence considered his late cooperation and the fact that part of the money was recovered, but it also emphasized the planning, abuse of trust, and intention to transfer the harm to his wife. Ethan received a reduced prison sentence subject to legal conditions, in addition to a professional disqualification and the obligation to repay the funds. He did not lose his freedom forever, but he did lose the life built on appearances. The divorce process began shortly after the criminal resolution. Ethan arrived at the first hearing thinner, wearing a simple suit, and without the entourage of lawyers he had imagined months earlier. Emily sat on the other side of the room. She was not carrying the black card. She no longer needed any symbol to remember who she was. The marital proposal prepared by Ethan was voided because of the fraudulent signatures and abusive clauses. The judge determined the separation of legitimate assets, recognized Emily's prior ownership of her companies, and ordered compensation for the unauthorized use of her resources. Ethan could not claim Golden Crown Group, the residence, or the businesses created before the marriage. Emily, for her part, chose not to ask for more than was necessary. Thomas reminded her that she had the right to seek greater compensation for the damage caused, but she decided to limit herself to recovering what had been stolen and protecting the people affected. She did not want to begin her new life tied to an endless battle. Before signing the final agreement, Ethan asked for a few minutes to speak with Emily. Thomas remained nearby but allowed them some privacy in an adjoining room. Ethan held the pen without writing. He said that for months he had replayed every decision and had finally understood how ambition had distorted the way he saw the world. He insisted Chloe was not the cause, but the consequence of an emptiness he filled with admiration, money, and status. He acknowledged that he had turned Emily's generosity into proof of inferiority, because admitting how much he owed her destroyed the image he had of himself. "I hated you for not needing to prove anything," he confessed. "I needed everyone to see me succeed, and you could walk into a room without asking for approval." Emily listened in silence. Those words were more honest than his previous apologies, but late honesty could not rebuild trust he had knowingly destroyed. Ethan asked for another chance after fulfilling his obligations. He did not promise to recover fortune or prestige, but to start over from the bottom. He said he still loved her and now understood the value of what he had lost. Emily felt a deep pang because for years she had waited to hear a truth like that. Yet she also understood that love should not be confused with responsibility for saving someone from his own choices. "I forgive you," she finally said, "but I will not come back to you." Ethan looked up, confused by the apparent contradiction. Emily explained that forgiveness was a decision to stop living by feeding hatred, not a contract requiring her to reopen the door to harm. I can hope you change without trusting you with my life again. I can remember the man I loved without accepting the man you became. And I can let you go without needing to see you destroyed. Ethan lowered his head and signed the documents. When Emily added her signature, she felt neither joy nor defeat. She felt the silence that remains after a storm that lasted too long. The marriage ended legally in a few minutes, but emotionally, it had ended that night in the restaurant when Ethan threw the bill against her chest and called her a kept woman. Outside the courthouse, several reporters tried to ask how much money her ex-husband had lost and whether she planned to use the case to promote Golden Crown Group. Emily replied that no amount of money could measure a betrayal. She also made clear that the company would not turn private pain into an advertising campaign. The important story is not that a rich woman defeated an arrogant man, she said. The important story is that no woman should need to be rich for her dignity to be respected. Then she got into the car with Thomas while Ethan remained on the courthouse steps, watching the only person who had loved him before he possessed an image worth defending drive away. In the months that followed, Emily returned publicly to the day-to-day leadership of Golden Crown Group. Many employees knew her name, but few had seen her participate so visibly in general decisions. She visited every establishment and spoke with waiters, cooks, cleaning staff, and administrative managers. She did not want the scandal to produce fear, but change. She discovered that some customers used personal relationships with executives to demand discounts, mistreat workers, or obtain reserved rooms. She also found cases of employees experiencing financial control in their homes who could not leave violent relationships because they had no accounts of their own. Those conversations showed her that her experience, though surrounded by luxury, shared roots with much quieter stories. Ethan had tried to take away her money and her options because he believed dependence was a form of power. Emily decided to use the recovered resources so that other people would not remain trapped by the same strategy. That was how the Jack Carter Foundation was born, named in honor of her father. Its purpose was to provide legal advice, professional training, and temporary financial support to women suffering financial abuse within marriage or family. The program did not hand out fortunes or promise immediate solutions. It helped women open secure accounts, recover documents, find employment, understand contracts, and build a realistic way out. Emily insisted that it also include emotional education, because many victims still believed enduring humiliation was proof of love. The first office operated in a modest space above the old restaurant in Lavapiés. Some wooden tables repaired by Jack were still preserved there. Emily chose that location to remember that dignity did not begin in luxury dining rooms, but in the ability to make decisions without fear. Golden Crown Group allocated a stable percentage of its profits to the project, and several partners committed to financing its expansion. Jason Roberts became one of the foundation's principal collaborators. He still felt guilty for having allowed Ethan to use Emily's name to obtain privileges, though she reminded him that he had been manipulated by someone who knew about the marital relationship. Together, they created a protocol preventing relatives or acquaintances of executives from receiving benefits without formal authorization. They also established a clear policy protecting staff. Any client who humiliated, threatened, or discriminated against a worker could be asked to leave the establishment regardless of fame or financial power. Some advisors feared the policy would drive away important customers. Emily replied that no dinner justified turning respect into a commodity. The Crown Madrid began to be known not only for its cuisine, but for the way it protected its employees. Many workers who had witnessed Emily's humiliation understood that that night had not been only a personal crisis. It had revealed what kind of company its owner wanted to build. Chloe, meanwhile, disappeared from social events for months. Public relations agencies avoided hiring her, and several contacts stopped answering her messages. At first she blamed Emily, the press, and everyone else. Later she began working with a professional reintegration program as part of her judicial obligations. There she worked with small associations that were not impressed by her clothes or by the names stored in her phone. One afternoon, she wrote Emily a letter. She did not ask for a job, money, or a public statement clearing her image. She acknowledged that she had used contempt for another woman to feel superior, and that her greatest shame was not losing her career, but remembering the smile with which she had watched the bill fall onto the tablecloth. Emily read the letter and put it away without answering immediately. Weeks later, she sent one brief sentence. Changing is not about getting people to forgive you, but about never again turning someone else into the price of your ambition. Margaret also tried to rebuild her life away from appearances. She moved into a small apartment and began therapy, something she previously would have considered a sign of weakness. She visited Ethan while he fulfilled his legal obligations, but she stopped promising solutions. When he complained about the harshness of the consequences, she reminded him of the documents, the recording, and Emily's face in the restaurant. That new honesty caused arguments, although over time, Ethan stopped asking her to blame others. Margaret requested a meeting with Emily and arrived without gifts. She thanked her for the medical operation Emily had secretly paid for years earlier and confessed that shame had kept her from doing so sooner. Emily accepted the gratitude, but did not allow it to become an artificial reconciliation. They agreed to maintain respectful distance. Some wounds could close without people returning to occupy the same place. 1 year after the divorce, Ethan obtained an administrative job at a small company with no authority to manage accounts or represent investments. The salary was far below what he earned in his former life, but for the first time, he depended exclusively on work he had not obtained through Emily. His co-workers knew few details of the scandal and treated him like any new employee. At first, that absence of recognition was unbearable to him. Later, he began to understand that normality was not humiliation. He paid for a modest room, used public transportation, and attended a financial responsibility program required by the sentence. He did not suddenly become a perfect man. Sometimes he felt resentment, and at other times he imagined what his life might have been if he had discovered Emily's identity earlier. But he began to recognize that even that question remained selfish. The real problem was not that he had failed to know she was rich, but that he had believed a woman without money deserved less respect. Emily learned about those changes through Thomas, but she did not seek Ethan out. She had learned that monitoring the transformation of the person who hurt her could become another way of remaining tied to him. Her life filled again with projects, travel, and business dinners, though she also made time for herself. She resumed her walks through Madrid, visited markets with young chefs, and returned to cooking some of her father's recipes. For years, she had reduced her presence so Ethan would not feel overshadowed. Now she understood that loving someone should never require disappearing. She did not begin a new relationship immediately, nor did she turn solitude into a tragedy. She discovered that she could return to a silent home without feeling abandoned, because chosen silence was different from silence imposed by contempt. Every ordinary decision, from opening a letter to choosing a dress, reminded her that she had recovered something more important than the stolen money: trust in her own voice. The Jack Carter Foundation assisted hundreds of women during its first year. One of them, Martha, arrived with 2 children and a folder of documents her husband had forced her to sign without reading. Another, Lucy, had spent decades believing she had no right to a bank account because she had never worked outside the home. Emily could not meet personally with every woman, but she attended some sessions and listened to their stories. In each one, she recognized a part of that night at the Crown: a bill used as punishment, a signature turned into a trap, a threat spoken in front of others to destroy the victim's confidence. Emily understood then that the black card had only changed the manager's reaction. It had not created her worth. Many women assisted by the foundation owned no companies and had no contacts, yet showed immense courage by taking the first step. That certainty became the project's central principle. No one should have to prove wealth, influence, or usefulness to deserve protection. On the foundation's 2nd anniversary, Emily organized a dinner at the Crown Madrid. She invited neither celebrities nor reporters. At the tables sat workers, volunteer lawyers, cooks, program beneficiaries, and people who had supported the rebuilding. Jason reserved the same private room where Ethan had forced her to pay for dinner with Chloe. Some team members thought the space held memories too painful, but Emily wanted to transform it. The table was no longer prepared for 3 people trapped in a humiliation, but for those who had turned a wound into a collective opportunity. On the tablecloth they placed Jack Carter's old notebook, open to a recipe written in faded ink. Emily remembered her father's sentence: "A restaurant reveals who you are when you believe the people serving you have no power." That night, every guest greeted the staff by name, and no one sat at the head of the table. When Emily entered, Jason bowed out of habit, repeating the greeting that had changed the course of the first dinner. She smiled, placed a hand on his shoulder, and asked him to sit down. "Tonight there are no presidents and no employees," she said. "Only people who have built something together." Jason hesitated, but finally took a chair beside her. The waiters served a menu inspired by the recipes from the first Lavapier's restaurant. There was no caviar, and no bottles chosen to impress. There was freshly baked bread, fish prepared the way Jack used to cook it, and a simple dessert Emily had learned to make as a child. During dinner, Thomas said a few words about the foundation, and recalled that justice had recovered money, but the community had recovered something harder: the certainty that power could be used to protect without humiliating. Emily raised her glass not to celebrate Ethan's fall, but the freedom of those who no longer depended on fear. At the end, Jason handed Emily a small box. Inside was a symbolic replica of the black card, made from wood from the old restaurant. The golden crown had been replaced by an engraved phrase: "Dignity needs no permission." Emily ran her fingers across the letters and felt that the memories of that night no longer carried the same weight. Her real card remained in her handbag, but she rarely used it. She understood that for years other people had confused authority with privilege, wealth with worth, and silence with obedience. Ethan believed he could force her to pay because he saw her as dependent. Chloe believed occupying an expensive chair made her superior. Margaret believed a family name justified contempt. All of them had to learn, in different ways, that power obtained through humiliation eventually devours the person who exercises it. Before leaving the restaurant, Emily remained alone for a few minutes by the window. Madrid glittered under the rain, just as it had on the night her marriage ended. She remembered the bill striking her chest, Chloe's laughter, and Ethan's voice ordering her to pay. Then she remembered Jason's bow, and understood that, although that gesture had stopped the humiliation, it had never been the true victory. The victory was refusing to sign out of fear, refusing to use her fortune for revenge, and refusing to let pain transform her heart into a copy of those who had hurt her. She took the black card from her handbag, looked at it one last time, and put it away again. She did not need to leave it on any table. No one could convince her anymore that her worth depended on what she owned. Emily turned off the lights in the private room and went out to join the people waiting for her, leaving behind the place where a betrayal had ended and a new life had begun.